All right, it's 10 o'clock, so I'm going to take a deep breath and get ready for 90 minutes or so of helping everybody understand ETEPs and the best approach for them. You can only see half the screen. Is anybody else experiencing an issue where they can only see half the screen? Same here. Okay. All right, when I have it in normal mode, can you see the full screen? So as of right now, can you see the full screen or half the screen? I see about 4/5, and the ad is blocking out the edge of your PowerPoint. Half. All right, so how about now? What can people see now? Four-fifths ads on the right of the screen. The issue is the ad. Okay. It's your ad or the one on my, so if I put it in slideshow mode, let's see, this is slideshow mode right now, and people are saying they can only see half the screen. Ads on the right-hand side of the page. Better half. All right, let me see if I do this to the left-hand side. Is this a better? I apologize for the technical difficulties. That works. It's full screen for all of you? Okay. All right, so I'm not going to get to kind of use my fancy transition graphics and stuff like that, but I want to make sure everybody can see it. So I'm going to get started now. So this webinar is for understanding, developing, and implementing an EPA tribal environmental plan. I'm Josh Simmons. I am a principal consultant, attorney, and collaborative strategist with Prosper Sustainably, and I'll share a little bit more about myself in a moment. So I do want to provide, just make sure everybody understands where this webinar came from. And hold on just a second while I get my notes up now that things are out of sort a little bit. All right, so yeah, thank you for bearing with me. So yeah, I want to make it clear that this webinar is not sponsored or endorsed by the US EPA and should not be considered a representation of their opinions in any way, shape, or form. All right, so as I mentioned, my name is Josh Simmons, and I'm the founding president of Prosper Sustainably. This organization assists individuals, organizations, and tribes in developing and implementing lasting solutions to meet environmental and sustainability needs. I and Prosper Sustainably offer a variety of services. I will share some of those at the end. Many of you know me. I was the director of the Chumash's Environmental Office up in Santa Ynez in California from 2007 to 2014. Had a lot of success there and really helped, I believe, transform that office into one of the leading environmental programs in the nation, although there are a lot of tremendous ones out there. And there's a lot that have some needs, and I'm excited now to be in a greater position to help more tribes reach that level. And during that time, secured a lot of grants, a lot of funding, and expanded. We went from about 2 to 20 plus programs. Many of you also know me from either code, the ETEP waste code development workshops, or as a grant writing instructor. I did a few grant writing courses when I was with the Chumash a couple of years ago through the Bureau of Reclamation and Fish and Wildlife Service. So some of my consulting experience in working with tribes. So I have done 3 ETEP development projects with the Rincon Band of Luis Sueño Indians, Palo Band of Mission Indians, and La Jolla Band of Luis Sueño Indians. The ones with the Palo Band and La Jolla bands are going on right now. The Rincon Band was the first one that I did. And I didn't develop an ETEP while I was with the Chumash. That's when the GAP guidance had first came out. But I had conducted strategic planning with the Chumash, and this is kind of the precursor of developing the approach and process that I am going to share with you today. I also have done some GAP work plan development. I did that last November, and helping the Chemehuevi tribe prepare their GAP proposal. I've been working on a major co-development project for the Cabazon Band of Mission Indians, and that involves developing their air, water, waste, underground storage tanks, chemicals, hazardous substances, and environmental review ordinances. So that's, as of right now, it's about a 100-page ordinance, but it's kind of chock full, a lot of substantive, really good information that tries to make it as efficient of approach as possible for tribes to manage these issues without trying to do too much or get bogged down into too many details or the weeds. And then also last fall, I worked with the Palo Bands. I assisted them in preparing a Department of Energy grant proposal, and they did ultimately secure that funding for a PV system. So I also want to share why I do what I do. And this is a mission statement that I've recently developed. I essentially, for my business and even personally, want to help individuals, organizations, and communities clarify, pursue, and fulfill their potential. And so that is a little bit broader than just the environmental and sustainability context, but that's where my experience lies and my passion lies, although I hope and expect my career to even kind of go beyond that eventually, but I do want to always work in the environmental arena. So the objectives for this presentation, I'm going to first start off by introducing what exactly an ETEP is. So what is it? What is its purpose? What are its benefits? What are the format and requirements for an ETEP? And there's some flexibility there. I'm going to show you an ETEP strategic work plan template. I'm going to walk you through that. That's something that I developed in my work with tribes. I'm going to share how an ETEP strategic work plan can be aligned with the GAP work plan to make that process of developing your GAP work plan and proposal each year easier and more seamless. I'm going to go through the steps of developing an ETEP. And then also share some considerations and steps for implementing and updating an ETEP. I'm going to link an ETEP to a larger strategic planning process and show how that fits in and how the strategic planning process can complement the ETEP development. Finally, I'm going to describe how and if Prosper Sustainably can assist if you are seeking assistance or decide that you would like some assistance in developing an ETEP. And then at the very end, I will answer questions and hope that you'll complete a survey that should pop up. So when you're done with the webinar, if you can hit the exit rather than just closing the window, it should bring you to a webinar, or sorry, a survey. It's just a couple questions, and your feedback will just help me in doing what I'm doing better. So I'm asking that you type your questions in the chat area. So most of you have found it. It's in the bottom left of your screen, or it should be. And I'm going to answer those at the end of the presentation. I will sift through them if there are any. I'm also going to check it periodically. But really briefly, I want to check in, make sure everybody can see the screen okay, can hear me okay. Please just give me a response and make sure that in the chat window, just to make sure that you are all receiving this. I haven't seen a text message or chat message in a little while. So hopefully I see some pop up. Great, fantastic. And the size of the screen, the size of the text is okay for everybody? Great. Thank you all. I appreciate the feedback. This is a collaborative effort. So I'm not going to get into this slide too much. Really, I want to put this up here for any GAP historians. This is ultimately the GAP legislation in text is where everything comes from. I don't think I see the bottom of the screen, and the ads are very annoying on the right, but okay. Yeah, I apologize. It's the only way I can kind of make this freely available to everybody is through this AnyMeeting application, which is ad-based. When you say you're missing the bottom of the screen, if you can see all the text, then that's, you know, essentially the main portion. If you can't see the text, then that would be a concern. So back to this slide. So if you want to kind of understand where ultimately the ETEP comes from and the origins of GAP and ETEP, then you can go back and look at this. These slides are going to be available on my website. I will share it with everybody. I'll send an email with the links, and you can come back and look at that. But it's not entirely relevant to our conversation today. So ETEP is an EPA Tribal Environmental Plan. And I think the best way to describe what it is by sharing or just going through the goals that are defined in the EPA 2013 GAP guidance. So I'm going to read through these. These are a summary of that GAP guidance. And I'm going to elaborate on these where necessary. So one of the first goals the EPA stated was to define mutual roles and responsibilities for program implementation. The EPA or the ETEPs are also seeking to establish a joint EPA tribal planning process to address tribal environmental priorities and ensure that federal programs are fully implemented. And I'm going to talk about each of these in more detail and what these actually mean as we progress with the presentation. Another goal is to identify the tribe's plans to manage authorized environmental programs, and that is a piece of language that actually I think has been confusing for some tribes. I'm going to elaborate upon in later slides. Another goal is to identify the need for environmental programs, assistance, and resources. So the EPA wants to know, and this will help you yourself from a tribal perspective understand what resources are going to be needed or what assistance will be needed. Another goal is to establish intermediate and long-term goals to be able to track the progress against or basically in pursuing both of those intermediate and long-term goals. Ensuring linkage of a GAP work plan, its tasks and its contents with the long-term goals of an ETEP and ultimately of the tribe. For additional goals are to improve the alignment of the work plan activities with those long-term goals and priorities. That was stated in the guidance twice in two different ways. It's meant to better position the tribes and the EPA to effectively build environmental program capacity through the GAP funding program. I think the most important two in terms of making this something useful for a tribe is these last two. So streamlining the approach for a long-term planning tool that can be modified as needed. And I underline that because I think it should be modified on an ongoing basis to be as effective as possible. And it states in the guidance that it's intended to be a living, usable document for both the tribes and the EPA as partners to use in planning and guiding work. And, in seeing that and just knowing that plans that are adaptable, that are actually used rather than the ones that sit on a shelf, are ultimately going to help you achieve and reach your goals faster and the easiest manner possible. This stood out to me in terms of what I wanted to develop and share with tribes to make this the most effective, useful process possible. So these are the ETEP goals and benefits that I see. So these are not stated directly in the guidance, although there is some overlap between them or some similarities. So I see the ETEPs as being able to help a department, tribal environmental department programs operate more efficiently and effectively. I think that if done well, you you should be able to accomplish more with less resources and more quickly. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to have less resources. I actually believe that an effective ETEP would mean that you would be able to identify and secure more resources to accomplish more goals and objectives, and more effectively anticipate your resource needs. So understanding what funding, staffing, training, and other assistance you're going to need to accomplish those goals. Uh, it'll also help you to identify and establish collaborative partnerships, or can do that if done well and effectively. An ETEP can and should help create and maintain alignment with efforts and goals, or I'm sorry, maintain alignment of efforts with goals. So you clarify your goals, and then you develop your activities, tasks, efforts, and objectives that are in alignment with those, and then you consistently evaluate those with those highest goals in mind, and not just for your department, but among in your staff, but also among leadership, the EPA, and any other stakeholders that may be interested in what your department is doing. So I need a drink of water. It allows you to be proactive rather than reactive with respect to issues and opportunities. I think it really gives you the ability to create opportunities rather than just to respond to issues. And it's, inevitably things are going to come up that you're going to have to deal with, but I think you're in a much better position to do so when you have a strategic foundation in place. And it also helps you avoid chasing funding opportunities or just opportunities in general that don't meet your highest needs. And have been very guilty of that in the past. Working with the CHUMASH, especially early on, when I saw funding opportunities out there, I didn't necessarily always have a plan or see how they fit, but I saw money. And I thought, okay, well, I need money to keep this office going, and it seems like it could be something that could fit our needs. And some of them ultimately ended up doing it. We ended up developing new programs, and where we didn't have some needs, we developed new ones. But I think it would have been more beneficial, we would have been more effective if I sat down from the very beginning and understood what are our highest needs, and then strategizing the funding opportunities and other opportunities out there to meet those needs. And I imagine, and I'm familiar that the tribes tend to be in a similar position. And I think if you are proactive in this manner, you'll find that there's plenty of funding and other resources out there to meet most of your highest needs somehow, some way. And you're not going to be able to accomplish necessarily everything of all your highest needs, but I think you keep those things in mind, and it's amazing how opportunities just tend to present themselves. It allows you to evaluate issues, opportunities, and activities for alignment with goals. So just being able to do this systematically, when you discover a new opportunity, an issue, or are just trying to develop an activity, being able to do this in alignment in the context of your highest goals is always important to do. So you're not wasting time and resources pursuing something that's not appropriate for you or your office or the tribe. It provides protection against setbacks due to turnover. So I think an effective ETEP will help you retain staff because it'll make your organization, your tribe, your department a better place to work for and with. And it also provides easier transition when staff does leave. I mean, having staff leave is inevitable. And if you have a plan, a comprehensive plan in place that shows where you are and where you're going, then it's going to be much easier to integrate new staff members and to not lose as much ground when they leave. I think most importantly, it can keep everything that your environmental department, your office, your program is doing in proper perspective. So I advocate having everything that your office and program does included in your ETEP, not just limiting it to what the EPA funds, what GAP funds, what maybe is environmental, but everything your office does, because instead of just focusing on your highest priorities and keeping those in the plan, the problem with that is you won't be able to understand exactly how much resources you have available to pursue your highest priorities if you don't understand everything that you're doing. So it keeps everything in context so that you can plan appropriately, dedicate resources appropriately. These are the ETEP requirements and format guidance from the 2013 GAP guidance. So I'm going to go through each one in kind of summary fashion right now and then go through them in detail. So there's 4 main required components in an ETEP. The first one is identification of tribal environmental program priorities, including capacity building and program implementation goals. I underline this because this is where the bulk of your work is going to go. This is where most of the elements of the ETEP come into play, and it's really what guides you. The rest of them are either not as in-depth or involve the EPA, and actually may require the EPA's lead. So the next one is identification of EPA program priorities and management requirements. This is ultimately what the EPA is deciding or trying to understand what they're trying to accomplish. So you have your program, the tribes have their program priorities and requirements, and the EPA has their own program priorities and requirements. Hopefully those are in alignment as much as possible. If they're not, then through this process you should be able to discover and identify how you can create alignment among EPA and tribal priorities and goals. The third requirement is an inventory of regulated entities, and I will get into that into more detail, what that actually involves, and that's something that the EPA may be taking a lead upon with your tribe. And then finally, identification of mutual roles and responsibilities. There's actually some overlap between these 4 required components. There's elements of number 4 and number 3. There's elements of 2 through 4 that can be integrated into number 1, or at least into an ETEP work plan that I'm going to show you a little later on. The ETEP development and format options are flexible, so I want to emphasize that. I'm going to be sharing a particular approach to it. It's not the only approach to it. There's various ways, but I obviously an advocate of my approach. It's as you'll see from this presentation and the work that I'm doing, I think these things out very thoroughly and try to develop the best, most efficient approach, not just in the short term, but what's going to be most beneficial in the long term. And I've been gaining perspective not just from tribal representatives, but also from EPA representatives. I'm trying to develop something that meets everybody's needs in the most efficient and effective manner possible. So, the ETEPs themselves must address the 4 required components, although the length, the level of detail, and the format can and will vary even among the template that I'm going to provide. It still is and should be customized to meet your particular needs. The time frame of an ETEP should be no more than 5 years. I've heard there's some concerns by some tribes about there being a wanting to have a longer time frame, and I believe that addressing a longer time frame is more appropriate to do in an overarching strategic plan, and I will get to that eventually during this presentation. The recommendation I have would actually be to develop a 4-year ETEP because that will provide the best alignment with your GAP funding cycles. If you have a PPG or a GAP that's 5 years, then I think 5-year would be a good thing to do as well. I also recommend that you develop a living continuous 4-year plan, meaning that you have a plan that's always covering the next 4 years. So after every year, you are archiving the year that just passed and adding a year onto the backside, and that helps. That really helps make this process to be the most beneficial it can be for you. And it ends up being, I think, it can be a tremendously powerful and effective yet manageable, that's the word I was looking for, a manageable process for you that's not overwhelming or burdensome. And I'll go into more of those benefits later on. And also there's the requirement that the EPA ETEPs be jointly reviewed at least annually and updated as needed, and this is supposed to be done by the tribe and the EPA. you're from the tribal perspective, you're the only one, you are in control of your ability to review it yourself. I would say you do your own review of the ETEP annually, and in addition to that, you review it with the EPA after you do your own review. Um, the EPA, they're spread thin, just like tribes are, and they, sometimes their ability to jointly review something or get feedback to you can be delayed. So you don't want to have to wait upon them to have this be a powerful, effective tool and to continue to be able to move forward. Okay, so diving now into the first major component, the tribal programs and priorities. So the main elements that are required in this are a short description of the priority. So my recommendation here, and so I try to distinguish or just call out certain things using the red text. My recommendation here is to use your program areas as your priority. So instead of just coming up with a series of priorities that you think are the most important for you, I actually think that it would be more effective for your department to have, every program relative, regardless of its priority relative to another program, is still something that should be accounted for in operating your office. So I think that, and then you'll have specific priorities under those, which I think can be developed more as objectives and milestones or fleshed out in terms of the program goals themselves. So that's the next one is a statement or the element that the tribe's long-term environmental program goals should be incorporated. And this is something that you are familiar with, at least these elements are you're familiar with because you're kind of developing them already when you develop your GAP work plans. And you may be developing them in other work plans as well, especially the EPA ones where they ask for your long-term outcomes. I think your long-term outcomes is the same thing as your long-term environmental program goals. You may want to put some additional thought into them, more thought than you put into doing your GAP work plan. If you're like me, I, sometimes in the past want to get my GAP work plan done, so I put in the work plan what I think is going to, the EPA wants to see, where with the ETEP, I would do a better job of making sure it's what I want to see, what I think the tribe wants to see, what my staff wants to see, and other stakeholders want to see. So this long-term program goal will address or support the priority or that priority program area. And again, that's just a recommendation. You can still go with having those, breaking it down by priorities rather than program areas. It's just my recommendation. The third element required is their intermediate program development milestones, and I put / objectives because I really think that that's what they are. It's the objectives. So, goals are your long-term, what you want to accomplish eventually. Some of them you may never accomplish. A goal as an environmentalist might be to improve, enhance the environment, and that's a goal that's possibly never going to end, or at least in our lifetime, is an ongoing thing. An objective is more time-based in this context. It would be the time-based of the ETEP. So the objective would be what is an intermediate step to achieving that goal. So as I mentioned, accomplished within the ETEP timeframe. The fourth element are the tribe's plans to manage authorized environmental programs. So I mentioned that this is something that has led to some confusion. And I'm going to talk a little bit about here and then even talk a little bit about it on a later slide. This is the authority of the tribe to manage a delegated EPA regulatory program. An example, the most clear example of this would be treatment as a state authority. And that could be under Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, CERCLA. But TAS is not the only authorities that a tribe can be delegated or can manage for an EPA regulatory program. And each authority must be officially delegated by the EPA. So the tribes have the ability to manage these things on their own, just not officially with the federal backing. So a tribe could, for instance, develop a solid waste code, and that code can be enforced according to tribal law. That code is not necessarily federally enforceable. In contrast, if a tribe developed a water quality standards and integrated those water quality standards into a tribal water quality code, and those water quality standards, the tribe attained TAS for those water quality standards, those would be federally enforceable. So that's where the authority to manage a delegated EPA regulatory program comes into play. That is applicable to the second example with the water, but not applicable to the first example with the waste. So you could still pursue the ability to manage these programs on your own. It's just a matter of whether your tribe wants to or needs to have that federal backing, that federal enforcement support. The fifth element is needed assistance to achieve goals and milestones / objectives. I'm just going to say objectives from now on. Just, each time I wrote milestones and goals. So what assistance does your tribe, does your program need in terms of training, technical assistance, EPA direct implementation actions, financial assistance, so on and so forth? I have not seen any messages in a little while, so I'm assuming that everybody still can see and hear everything okay. Great, thank you. Okay, so the second major component is EPA program and priorities. This covers the federal statutory programs that are EPA's responsibility. And this stems to, so if a tribe has not assumed responsibility for a particular regulatory program, the EPA is supposed to still be responsible for it. The EPA's responsibilities go deeper and broader than that, but ultimately that's one of their primary focuses, especially with the ETEP. They want to define if the tribe is not taking on a particular regulatory authority under federal law, and there's a gap there that EPA is supposed to fill, they want to be aware of that. And they want to work with the tribes to identify where and how they can assist. So I have Nathan saying the bottom of the screen may be cut off. Can you see at least this right here, specific goal steps, the one I just highlighted, or at least see my cursor down at the bottom of the slide? Okay, so long as you can see that, then I know where to put this. And then if I bring any other documents, I'll have them be within this particular window right here. So elaborating upon that, back in the last slide, I talked about the tribe's plans to manage authorized environmental programs. So there's a linkage between that and EPA's program and priorities. So the EPA wants to review and document the tribal status, intentions, and activities regarding their willingness, intentions, and abilities to assume those delegated responsibilities. And I created a list right here. I think it's pretty comprehensive of the federal statutes under which a tribe could assume some level of delegated authority from the EPA or the federal government. In terms of at least the EPA's jurisdiction, so the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, CERCLA, EPCRA, FIFRA, RCRA, the Safe Water Drinking Act, and then TSCA. I don't want to attempt to read some of those, like EPCRA. That's a pretty, it's a tongue twister. So this can include the EPA's implementation with respect to tribal participation. So this can include EPA implementation with tribal. So these are the different levels. Yeah, and I saw the comment that there's some things that RCRA cannot do. And so, in looking at each of these, some of these are TAS authorities. Some of them are just the tribe's assumption of a particular authority. So an example would be under RCRA. A tribe may want to assume the ability to do inspections under RCRA and to have some regulatory authority. It's not the tribe acting on its own behalf or the tribe assuming that regulatory authority. It is the designated person or designated agency from the tribe acting on the behalf of the EPA doing something. So that level of what they choose to do can be cooperative. So the EPA, yeah, and I did mention that, but thanks, Luke. And I'll come back to that in a moment. The EPA, the tribe could choose to help the EPA. So the EPA could be implementing something on the reservation or within the tribal jurisdiction. The tribe could be assisting by going out and helping with investigations, providing information. The tribe, possibly if the EPA allows it or the statute allows it, the tribe could assume some of that delegated responsibility. The tribe does always independently have their ability to regulate these things on their own under tribal law. So I guess coming back to the UST example, the tribe could assume some responsibility to do inspections and enforcement of USTs under federal law. The tribe also has the ability to develop its own UST codes that are enforceable under tribal law, which may not necessarily be enforceable under federal law. So the tribe can actually concurrently enforce both at the same time. There's various levels. So I mentioned TAS. There's non-TAS delegation. There can be MOUs or memorandums of understanding or MOAs, which can be intergovernmental. In some instances, that might be an intergovernmental agreement with the EPA. This isn't really as much a concern with the EPA, but a tribe could develop an MOU or an MOA with a state to help them with some of those regulatory needs. So, whether that's part of the EPA's responsibility programs or priorities, that's a discussion for them. There's the DITCAs, and just keep in mind the available authorities, as I mentioned, will vary according to which statute you're under, and these are discussions to have with the EPA. I think if you are interested in kind of understanding these, and especially if you are interested in assuming some authority under the tribal new source review, either the minor new source review or the major new source review, then you refer to the manual that was developed by ETEP, which is on the EPA website. And that actually does a very good job of breaking down some of the authorities. It doesn't cover all of them, but it shares a lot of the authorities in context of the Clean Air Act under the new source review authorities under the Clean Air Act. So the establishing and integrating the EPA program and priorities into an ETEP is to be done by the regions, so the EPA regions in coordination with the tribes and with the EPA headquarters. One suggestion I have, which is actually for the EPA, would be to provide, and I've shared this with some EPA officials, is to provide a checklist for each tribe, and there may be one, there actually may be some in development, but it's providing a checklist for each tribe, a complete checklist to indicate that the tribe completes, indicating their status and intentions for each regulatory authority. So with the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, even under RCRA. So under RCRA, I mentioned the UST, which isn't like a TAS authority. It's just an ability to administer a particular aspect of that, subject to, on behalf of the EPA. There'd be a list of, there could be a list of 10 or so for each one, and the tribe would state what, under this I have, for the example, the tribe would state its status, whether it's applicable or not applicable, if it's not pursuing, if it's in development, if it's adopted, or if it's adopted but they're in process of revision, the need for it. So if it's high, low, medium, or none, or not applicable, if you don't have any underground storage tanks, then you don't necessarily need to assume any regulatory authority for underground storage tanks. A goal, so you could the tribe would specify a particular goal with respect to that particular authority, if any. Then we could start to spell out maybe the next steps, just very summary fashion, and then the time frame with which the goals, the next steps would expect to be accomplished, and that could help everybody be on the same page. I think a checklist like that would just help tribes understand exactly what authorities they can assume, because I think that's unclear, and I couldn't look at each one of these statutes myself and know what a tribe could or could not assume without further research. Those specific goals, steps, and related activities that the tribe wants to pursue regards to assuming those particular regulatory authorities should be integrated, in my opinion, into the ETEP. So, there's this separate process for developing these with the tribe, with the EPA, but I think that element 4 from that last slide, the tribe's plans to manage authorized programs, there are objectives and steps to achieve that you can and should, or in my opinion, you can and should integrate into your ETEP work plan, strategic work plan. The third component is an inventory of regulated entities, and again, there's overlap between doing this and how you can integrate this in your strategic work plan, because there's a variety of steps that you should and can and should include. So I've been told that the EPA is planning on providing a list of the known regulated entities to each tribe as a starting point, so the tribes don't have to go and find out which entities within their jurisdiction are regulated under federal environmental statutes. These can be looked up with a variety of tools. One they mentioned in the GAP guidance was the facility registry system, and I provided the link there. I assume that this is going to be one of the main things the EPA uses to find which entities are being regulated. And then really the steps during this process should be, as I mentioned, entered as objectives and activities. So if you're drafting the ETEP right now, developing this inventory should be one of the objectives that you have within the ETEP work plan, and then as you progress through it, you can update that. The tribe will update that once the EPA provides that list. If the tribe wants to wait to get that list, then the tribe will update it with additional regulated entities. A particularly ambitious tribe could just go to those databases or go to their knowledge base and start developing that inventory on their own if they choose. So that the tribe updating that inventory is an objective and activity that I think should be included in the ETEP with tribal responsibility. The tribes may want to have a broader inventory. So the EPA is going to be focused on the entities that are regulated under federal environmental statutes, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, RCRA, CERCLA, so on and so forth. The tribe, that there's specific ones, they're going to be focused on the ones that need permits. So I'm going to talk about underground storage tanks again. Underground storage tanks don't necessarily need permits under RCRA, but the tribe may want to have an inventory of underground storage tanks, or tribe may want to have an inventory of the septic systems. The tribe may also want to have things that are off reservation. So you may want to keep an inventory of, or develop and maintain an inventory of what's going on in your surrounding jurisdictions, especially properties that are adjacent or anything that could affect your tribe. If you have TAS authority for water quality standards or ambient air quality standards, then you may want to be able to monitor what's going on with entities outside that are going to be pursuing permits for doing air emissions or water emissions, because they may impact your tribe, and you may want to exercise that authority to comment on those or be involved in that process of them acquiring those permits. So as an example, the inventory should be updated as appropriate. So if there's operating status changes, there's new facilities, etc. If you know these things on your side, then updating that inventory, maintaining that. So that can be just updating that can be entered into your ETEP work plan as an annual thing to do. So to at least look at that annually, discuss it with the EPA annually, and then go make sure there are no major changes or new facilities each year. The presence, does 3 apply if a tribe doesn't have reservation? technically I don't think if the tribe didn't actually have jurisdiction or any, if the tribe did not have its own jurisdiction, then this probably would not apply. Luke may be able to verify that. My initial instinct would say if a tribe does not have it, you may want to develop and maintain an inventory, but since there's no EPA regulated entities within the jurisdiction of the tribe, then it really is like they're on either state or federal property, uh, which is already, they should already be accounted for. The presence of these regulated entities within tribal jurisdiction, if the tribe does have a reservation or other trust lands, determines which federal environmental statutes are applicable. So, going back to slide number 2, determining which regulated entities on there are going to determine which of these federal statutes right here are actually applicable you need to give attention to, or the EPA is going to need to give particular attention to. The next component, number 4, mutual roles and responsibilities. This is defining activities to be conducted by the tribe and the EPA within the ETEP itself, including what the tribe is going to do to support the EPA's direct implementation of those federal environmental programs. So it's really just kind of elaborating upon what we were talking about in the last 2 slides about the EPA's regulatory authority and what the tribe is going to be doing to meet those needs, what the EPA is going to be doing to support the tribe's program development and implementation needs, and then what tribes will do to either apply for program approval and or delegation, and that's that regulatory authority, and or build capacities to partner with the EPA to implement applicable federal programs. So that's all in the guidance. It's fairly straightforward. It's what we've been discussing, it's what I've been explaining. These things should be determined, discussed with the EPA and tribal staff. So just defining the roles within the ETEP. And the ETEP or the GAP guidance also requires that a tribe include the environmental program capacity indicators to be established. So this is going back to the GAP guidance and going through those capacity indicators. And then also providing a general timeline for establishing each capacity indicator. So I'm going to show you, a good way to do that. And, there isn't going to be, for every tribal goal and objective, there isn't going to be a GAP capacity indicator. But when there are, you want to be able to identify those, and that will help you in developing your GAP work plans. So my additional note was to include a role for each objectives / milestone / activity in the ETEP strategic work plan, and I will show you how to do that. There's the main 4 components, but there's also some additional ETEP requirements that are just embedded within the guidance. And some of these are a little bit of an overlap with what I said, but I think it's important to notice these and call these out because I think the EPA is ultimately going to require these. So the completion dates for the tribal and EPA activities need to be included to allow the EPA and the tribe to measure progress and performance. Those progress indicators or progress measurement is supposed to be included. So, progress measurement, I'm saying in other words, is performance indicators. And this helps indicate how the tribe and the EPA are going to monitor the progress toward their respective goals and allow them to monitor their progress toward each other's goals. Annual work plan joint evaluation to include the EPA's activities. So that evaluation, when you do that joint evaluation, you want to make sure, or this is more you holding EPA accountable for their part of this, is making sure that when you're doing that joint evaluation, they're not just focusing on the tribe's activities, but they're also looking at their own activities. Alignment of the GAP work plans with the ETEP program priorities and those mutual roles and responsibilities. I'm going to show how you can do that seamlessly later on in the webinar. So I already showed part of their goals is just a living document to be actively used by the tribe and the EPA, and I just kind of want to put this here for extra emphasis and revising and changing revising your ETEP as conditions change. But I think we're really revising it at regular intervals. And then one last requirement I want to point out is just the support of senior officials of the tribe and the EPA. And those, that's senior officials of the tribe is verbatim from the GAP guidance, but for your own sake, you want to make sure you have support within the tribe itself to achieve the goals of the ETEP. So here's a summary. I want to provide you with a summary of the ETEP components and provide a suggested approach. I'm going to walk you through the summary and then show you a template that I have developed for an ETEP strategic work plan. So I think this just kind of simplifies all the requirements I just talked about. This just kind of simplifies and summarizes them. So a strategic work plan. So I recommend approaching this through a strategic work plan spreadsheet, which I think is a way to develop a truly living document rather than in a Word document or static document. The approach to the worksheet, the Excel worksheet, could be adopted or adapted to a Word document, but I think won't be as usable and flexible if it was done that way. So there's the priority program areas, and those should include all current and proposed program areas. So you want to make sure you're covering all of your department's program areas, including the ones that are not covered by the EPA and including the ones that are not environmental. So if your tribe does cultural resources related stuff, if it does historic preservation, if it does emergency planning that goes beyond environmental disasters, it's really important for you to understand everything your program or your department is doing to understand how much resources and time that you can dedicate toward everything. And it just puts everything in context. So a description of each program area, the long-term program goals by program area, and this could be 1 to 3 or 4 goals per program area. The intermediate milestones / objectives / activities by program area. So under each program area, you're going to have a couple goals, and then you're going to have a list of milestones and objectives. I recommend listing these by year, and then you repeat for the ongoing objectives that you have. So if you have ongoing water quality monitoring, that's something that you're going to have to dedicate resources to that. You want to keep that in proper context. I think that for each year you want to put that in for each year. So you'll put one particular objective that's ongoing for each year that you're doing it. You'll have to make a decision about whether you want to do it for over a calendar year or a fiscal year. You want to use what makes sense to you. If your program is run under entirely EPA grants, you don't have any tribal funding, any tribal budget, and all of your EPA grants are done on the federal fiscal year starting October 1st and ending on September 30th, you may want to do the time frame based on fiscal years or federal fiscal years. If you have a series of grants that are all over the place, or your tribe, if you have tribal funds or tribal objectives and programs that are funded annually, then you may want to do it just on a straight up calendar year basis. Or you can adjust it wherever you see meets your needs best. And you want to include, so under each intermediate objective, including the responsibilities, so having it show whether it's a tribe or EPA's responsibility. And then for the EPA ones, EPA objectives, adding those once they're established. So once the EPA agrees to a particular objective or activity, integrating that into the ETEP strategic work plan. The critical objectives and milestones should include as I mentioned before, the preparing the steps or multiple activities that are involved in preparing that inventory of regulated entities, and the pursuing of authorities to manage EPA statutory regulatory programs. Also including performance indicators per milestone or objective. I mean, this simply can just be your outputs or deliverables, but you can go beyond it and talk about performance metrics, goals, or anything else you want to keep track of to monitor your progress. But at minimum, you're going to need to provide the outputs and deliverables for your GAP work plan and for most programs. So I think that at minimum there needs to be some performance measures in the work plan. So I think at least focusing on those will meet that requirement. And then the last thing under the strategic work plan spreadsheet, indicating the needed resources by goal or objective. Some of those needed resources will actually be embedded as objectives. So identifying, pursuing, and securing funding is something you're going to need to do for a lot of your objectives, if not all of them. I like to put that in as a specific objective. So if you have an objective to develop an integrated solid waste management plan in 2017, I would recommend putting in identify, pursue, and secure funding for developing an integrated waste management plan in 2016, a year ahead of time. So that's a way of integrating those resources. If you need to do training to develop an integrated waste management plan, then you may pursue that training, integrate an objective to pursue that training either in the year you're developing it or the prior year, and even putting in that you're going to pursue funding to get that training as well. So there's the main spreadsheet, and then there's separate from the spreadsheet are the inventory of regulated entities that you'll develop with the EPA, and that's status of federal. You may also have a separate checklist that indicates the status of federal environmental statutory programs. In other words, the tribe's plans to assume those federal regulatory authorities. As I mentioned, that checklist format is optional and still needs to be addressed and developed by the EPA. I suppose a particularly ambitious tribe could develop it on their own. I have not developed one myself, but if I ever do, I will definitely share that. So as I mentioned, like developing an ETEP can make developing or preparing your GAP work plans each fiscal year easier. So here is how I see the GAP work plan aligning with an ETEP strategic work plan. And you know what, before I do that, let me walk you through the template of a sample ETEP. Okay, so you're gonna have to let me know whether you can, it's not set yet, but I wanna make sure everybody can see it. Okay, so can everybody see pretty much the full spreadsheet, at least the major components of it, even the tabs down in the bottom? So there's a table of contents. And is that a good size? Does it need to be no tabs, somebody said? Down to line 23, okay. Okay, and then is that, so everybody can see it now probably? I got it down to line 23. And it's probably, since your screens are all probably blowing this up, it should be a good size for you. So this is the strategic, or the ETEP worksheet template that I have developed and am continuing to modify. And it's something that can and should be customized for every single tribe. And I want to clarify again that this is not something required by the EPA. This is just my attempt at maximizing the ETEP process. So I guess somebody can only see down to 21. Let me see if I can raise it a little bit more. So at least you can see, part of the tabs. All right, so this is meeting all of those components in various ways. So I'm going to walk through each component. I like to provide a table of contents, so if you're at the very beginning, you can kind of just click to each particular component. Um, I have this is a bare bones template. I have not fleshed it out except for climate change, and I mean it really can be pretty involved. But the great thing about this is once you develop it the first time, and then if you do a good job developing this, and then you integrate the systems to keep it updated, it really can streamline your whole entire program. And I'll talk about more of the benefits once I'm done going through it, but I think it'll be hopefully obvious to a lot of you as we do it together. So, clicking over to climate change. Uh, let's see, how far right can I go? So how far right can everybody see? Is there any gap or space to the right side? So my cutoff, can you see the goals? On the actual, let's see, there's year, there's intermediate. Under the blue bar, it goes down to additional performance indicators and goals. And then there's area, you should be able to see an A. So indicators, goals. Can you see that full? But you can't see beyond the indicators and goals. Is that correct? Okay, good. All right, so you should be able to see. So I just clicked on, so this is the, coming back to this real quick, I'll switch back and forth to these requirements. Let's see. Okay, so here's your priority program area. This right here is your priority program area. And then the next thing is the description of the priority program area. The description, I think, can and should be brief. You can see the full description up here in the Excel entry box. You can't see it in the spreadsheet itself because it goes beyond the side of it. And then below that, you have your long-term goals. That can be anywhere. I think you should have at least 2 goals. It could be 3 to 4 to 5 if you have more goals. But those are general goals for the program area that apply to all the intermediate objectives and milestones that you'll develop. Okay, so here are the intermediate objectives and milestones. And as I mentioned, this may embed the need for resources. This may embed your pursuit of EPA regulatory authorities. It may embed the steps needed to pursue or to develop an inventory. This is what I do is I separate these by year, and I end up doing a separate year for each one. I developed it, so some of the things may not seem obvious as why I developed it in this manner, but not only it's good to have a spreadsheet, but you can run reports on these things if you have every column, every line have particular information. So having every single year, every single objective have a year listed next to it separately allows you to run a report across all of your programs for, let's say, 2015. You need the latest version of Excel 2013 to run a pivot table that incorporates data from multiple tabs, but you can run a pivot table within, if you have an earlier version, you can run a pivot table that just helps you summarize or get the particular information from one tab without that ability to include all of them, which is still, I think, very useful. So as I mentioned, one common theme among these is there's threads. So a common thread in this one, there's several threads. One goal that you may have is to develop or prepare a climate change vulnerability / risk assessment and report. So you want to do that in 2016. In 2015, you're going to want to get the funding to do that. And then in 2016, you'll see that right here is that's an objective you have for 2016. I think it's better to keep the high level objectives in here, not to make this too particularly detailed. At least from an overarching level, working with the EPA for your program, your department or program managers could take this and then create a more detailed one, but I think there should always be a bare bones copy like this or a higher level copy. So another thread would be to get funding to prepare a climate change adaptation plan. So there's the adaptation plan, and then you prepare the adaptation plan. So you pursue funding in 2016 for that. You prepare the plan, let's see, right here in 2017. And then in 2018, you actually can begin implementation of the climate change adaptation plan. Um, some of these goals, and so this is a very general goal. Since you don't know what's in the climate adaptation plan, you can't really specify what implementation is going to involve. So I think it's good to have a placeholder here that you're going to do some implementation. When you develop the plan in 2016 and then you're updating this in that year or the following year, and you know what specific things you're going to do to implement the adaptation plan, and what years, then you can change this to be more specific, and then you can spread it out among whatever years you see. If you know that right now you don't know what's going to be involved, but you imagine that's going to take at least 2 years to implement it, or it's going to be done on an ongoing basis, then you just put this same particular one in. If you had 2019, you would put it there as well. I have a mistake right here. I think this should be 2018 as well. So the next column is CIs, or capacity indicators. So I've tried to put little notes to share what some of the things are if it's not completely obvious. If there's a capacity indicator, a gap guidance capacity indicator number, then it's important, I think it's wise to enter that right here, and it'll make developing your work plan a lot easier later on. If there's multiple ones, include multiple ones. So in this instance, most of them are under air. Doing a greenhouse gas emissions inventory, I felt fell under a particular capacity indicator under the pollution prevention one. But there will be some that there is not a capacity indicator for. So preparing a climate change adaptation plan, there actually is a capacity indicator associated with that, I believe. I got to update this. But implementing the climate change adaptation plan would not have a capacity indicator because it's not capacity building. It's not something that's under the guidance. But it's still something your office wants to do and pursue. It just means that you're probably going to need to pursue funding elsewhere to do it. And you just want to keep it in context. In the EPA, it's good for them to see and know this because they can help you. They can understand these needs, and they can help you identify those additional resources. And maybe another EPA grant would come out that would allow you, that's not GAP, that would allow you to pursue that. You may be able to implement an adaptation plan under the Clean Air Act, either now or in the future. One thing I recommend too is you can only do so much within your office, and you can only do so much within 4 or 5 years. So you have limited resources, limited staff, limited funding. But there are things that you would like to do, or you may do if, let's say, you get the funding to do so. So I think it helps to put these possible activities here. So something that you want to do or you may choose to do down the road, to include that, and then you can run reports that show those things as well. To just meet that requirement of making sure that you demonstrate your plans to manage statutory environmental regulatory programs, you will embed your objectives to, let's say, obtain TAS for air quality standards or ambient air quality standards. You would embed that within the objectives themselves, but I think it's good to summarize what those are, or to indicate that there aren't any. So if the EPA looks through your work plan and doesn't see any, does not see any objectives for assuming regulatory, environmental statutory regulatory responsibilities, that's a mouthful, then they may just wonder whether it was an oversight or what you're doing. So you can specify, it's not, in this case for a under climate change, there's no regulatory authorities that I can see being applicable. It's not necessarily, or just not applicable to your situation. One thing I like to put in here, it's just like a supplemental additional thing to have. It's just possible funding resources. This is not required information, but I think important to have. Okay, so the next column is, there's the under intermediate milestones I mentioned that they need to be time-based. They need to include a responsibility. That responsibility is to the right some, so I put that under role. Oh no, so there's roles and there's responsibilities. Role is whether it's the tribe or EPA that's going to be doing it. Responsibilities are going to be further to the right. I'm not, whether this needs to be included in the ETEP or not. Um, it's not entirely clear, at least the staff level. But you're probably going to need to consider this for your own internal planning. You may need to include some of this information into your GAP work plan. So I think including your staff, primary staff responsibility and estimated work years. If there's a secondary staff responsibility and estimated work years, and you can add columns for additional staff responsibility. The beauty of doing this is if you fill out this worksheet and you do this every single year and you enter kind of estimates of how much time for each staff member, you can run a pivot table among all of these tabs and a pivot table report very quickly and see what it adds up to and see whether if you are overstretching a particular staff member or you are not giving them enough work to do. And obviously you want to have those discussions, and that staff member should help you in determining how much time it's going to take them to work on a particular objective. But I just think it's a very powerful planning tool, and you need to put in the work years to your GAP work plan anyways. The one other requirement is those performance indicators. So your outputs and deliverables are a performance indicator. You could choose to put additional performance indicators and goals if you want to or choose to. The area is just an entry to run more effective reports. So putting climate so that when you run a report, you can filter which areas or which programs that you're looking at a given time. I also like adding categories. So you might, pursuing funding or planning or partnering or implementing, educating. So you can get an understanding of, you can create your own particular categories and run tables that limit or filter out particular categories. You can add urgency. You can add the status of where you're at, a due date if you want to, estimated cost. If you do end up securing funding, how much you did secure for that, the source of that, notes, links, references. So these are just examples. All these things do not need to be included. Some of them do, and I've indicated which do, but some of them don't. And you could add more fields if you want as well. So this is really meant to be an effective thing for you. And so I have them for different categories. So there's for air. In terms of what you do for your categories, this is just a very general one, or at least, it's similar to some of them that I've worked on. There are some environmental emergencies is like a unique category. Land use is something that doesn't necessarily fall under the purview of the EPA. Green marketing and public relations, I think, is an opportunity for tribes and environmental departments, and something that I was doing with the Chumash. And pollution prevention and greening activities, I put sustainability under here. Sustainable landscaping and agriculture. Toxics, waste management, water, wildlife, and then a general category. So you don't want to just account for the programmatic, the main programmatic stuff. You want to account for everything your office is doing, everything you want to keep track of. And your general administrative and financial responsibilities are important and do need to be accounted for as well. And I do provide some examples you'll see in a moment. And this is where I can create a pivot table of something. So I can actually create a pivot table. Let's say I just want to look at the climate change activities for year 2015, or by year. Let's see, I'd have to actually go back and get these to show up properly. It's something about okay, so rows, columns. I haven't done this in a little while. Oh, it's because it's on sum, that's why. Let's see, let's put it over here. So yeah, so you could look at, very simply, you could produce a report really quick that breaks down by year. You just want to see the objectives you're doing each year. You can do that very quickly. You could filter out which staff members are working on things. So just to show you some of the power of what you can do with these pivot tables, or with this report. So let's get back to the presentation. Okay. So now, how does this align with your GAP work plan? The work plan element is, I think, in your GAP work plan is the same thing as an ETEP strategic work plan element. So you'll see that at the top of a sample work plan or in your GAP guidance. Since I'm starting to run a little low on time, I'm not going to go into these in too much detail. But if you go into your GAP work plan, you can compare what's in your GAP work plan and what is in a strategic work plan, and essentially how you're creating this information ahead of time. So if you're doing a 4-year strategic work plan, you essentially are also creating a 4-year GAP work plan, but you have the ability to update and modify and adjust the ETEP a lot more easily and proactively than you can the work plan. So when it gets to the point where you're developing that GAP work plan, it's already kind of been thoroughly thought out, vetted, and you can more easily just kind of cut and paste things. The priority program names can be changed to match those work plan components if you want. In fact, your process of developing the ETEP can start, part of the process can be, or should be, going back to your GAP work plans and identifying those kind of priority programs. And you can have those perfectly aligned. Your long-term outcomes equal your long-term goals. Your intermediate outcomes in the GAP work plan equal your intermediate objectives in the ETEP. Commitments are those objectives as well, so there's kind of a combination of these two. The commitments are really your intermediate objectives and milestones fleshed out a little bit, or maybe broken down into multiple activities with additional detail. The components, capacity indicators, you have the same thing in each. So you're putting those GAP capacity indicators in your ETEP work plan. Outputs in your GAP work plan is the same thing as the output / deliverable / performance indicator. I mentioned the roles. Your end date can be the due date or just simply, the year, depending on what level of specificity you want to have with your GAP work plan. Your responsibilities, your work years, and then the estimated commitment cost is the same. I believe you're going to be required to develop. This may change eventually, but work on the assumption that you're going to have to develop your GAP work plan separately from your ETEP. It may be possible down the road that the EPA requires a more integrated, seamless system or approach for this. I've heard from at least one EPA person where this could be combined. But just realize that developing ETEP does not mean your GAP work plan is developed. You're going to have to copy and paste this information into the work plan and flesh it out and adjust it to make sure that you're meeting the format requirements of the GAP work plan. Okay, so here are the steps for developing an ETEP, and some of this is a little bit of this is really the nitty-gritty. So this is the approach that I take, and I think an approach that you can take as well. The first step in this process is researching and scoping. So what I do is I gather, review, and extract information from relevant internal documents. And there's lots of different ones. There's your past TEPs, your environmental inventories, recent and future GAP or grants work plans, narratives, budgets, and reports. So what I do is I request this information from a tribe. I'll get the program narratives, plans, assessment, feasibility studies, environmental codes, regulations, compliance documents. You don't want to limit it to just your environmental department's information, internal information. You also want to get general tribal information as well. You want to make sure the strategy you're developing for your environmental program is in alignment with what the tribe is doing overall, and you also want to see if the tribe's doing stuff where you can anticipate their needs as well. So getting the general tribal strategy or land use documents or anything that provides general information about the direction the tribe is going that may have environmental implications is an important thing to review. And then you can supplement these with interviews and discussions with your staff, leaders, and other internal stakeholders. So I gather all this information, I comb through, I organize, and I analyze it, and then I use this to begin the development. So there's the internal scoping. I would call that the internal scoping. And then there's some external scoping you can do. So gathering, reviewing, and extracting information from relevant external documents, including but not limited to. After I do the internal scoping, I will then go I do some organization analysis of that information, I will go to the gap guidance and I will look through the capacity indicators or focus on the capacity indicators and identify other possible objectives, activities, and milestones that the tribe's environmental department may want to pursue. And then I will, when I'm doing this, is I'll record the relevant capacity indicator number, so that I don't have to do this later on. I don't have to go back and find it later on. I'll look through environmental grant funding announcements that are, ones that the tribe may not have. I'll look through environmental agency guidance, so not just the EPA, but it might be Department of Energy, Fish and Wildlife Service, USDA, and RCS. So looking through their guidance documents about their goals and objectives, you may discover new goals and objectives that you have. And then you can supplement these with interviews and discussions with agency representatives, external stakeholders, etc. When I approach this, I also have my own knowledge base. So my experience working with the Chumash, my experience working with other tribes in developing those. So I kind of have my own internal database, either through the projects I've done or just in my brain. And also I just, I'm a fairly creative, intuitive person. So I tend to come up with new ideas or see opportunities and synergies that may not be obvious. And, having that outside perspective can help as well, whether it's me or whether it's an agency or somebody else who can kind of take a look and provide some fresh ideas. So the next step is developing and prioritizing that list of objectives and milestones. So after organizing and mining all of that information in that research and scoping phase and organizing it, I'll organize it by program area. I'll work on defining those, so I'll make the recommendation in terms of what I see coming up as the most appropriate program areas. But of course, that ultimately comes down to how the tribe, how the environmental department is going to define those. That process can also include performance indicators. So if you want to kind of consider what are performance indicators of accomplishing certain goals. So an example would be if you're doing a waste site cleanup, a performance indicator might be how much waste you actually clean up, what quantities, what types. Might be the environmental improvements in the water, in the soil. It might be the specific deliverables themselves. So the removal of that waste. I think so once you have that list, you want to note the high, medium, and low priorities, and then if something's not a priority. So I just, I think a way to do this is just kind of going through it and highlighting highlighting like green, what's a high priority. Don't highlight something that's just a medium priority and then maybe highlight yellow, something that's a low priority. And then if it's not a priority, then, maybe highlight it red. I think, I would not recommend deleting something that's not a priority unless it definitely will never be pursued, because you may want to put that in the possible list. You just may want to keep it there for future reference. You want to review those objectives and priorities with your staff, leadership, EPA, and other stakeholders and refine those to really discern what are your highest priorities. And then from there, you're going to develop once you have those priorities, so let me just show you an example. I'm not going to go through it in much detail because we're running short on time. This is going to be on my website as well. Let me shrink this down a little bit. So this is an outline, a sample. I have my own kind of way of going mining and researching and stuff like that and organizing that. I didn't have an opportunity to create a template from it, but I did create a template from my outline of program areas, objectives, and performance indicators. I like to use headers and create tables of contents to make these things easy to navigate. And this I actually went beyond what I put in that sample ETEP and put different categories of things that you may have or you may want to consider. So one example would be pest management. You may want to have like I think putting enforcement and compliance under the particular media it's relevant to, like water, waste, or air, makes the most sense. But you may want to have a more general enforcement category, and then always you want to have a general administrative and financial category. Point out a few things real quick. when I do this, even though for most of these I don't actually include the capacity indicator, I just showed an example of, I have air quality. So that's the program area. You may want to enter the goals. I didn't put them here. I think you can do that later on. Here's the objectives and milestones. If you want to add performance indicators, I didn't include performance indicators in this template document, but I did provide examples of objectives and milestones underneath each area. And this is an instance where I associate it with a particular capacity indicator. Doing this now will save you time and effort later on. You can just easily enter this into a spreadsheet rather than going back and looking at the gap guidance again. So this will be available to you as a sample and as a template for you to use. When it's posted on my website, I'll let you know. Okay, so next you have that. You'll have the objectives and milestones, that list set up, and then you're going to take that and you're going to start entering it into the strategic work plan. And this is, you're going to insert the program areas, description, long-term goals. You may not have defined those things yet, so you may have to take some time defining, developing that one sentence or long-term goals. Lost connection. This is going to be posted later. Yes, this is going to be posted. I'm recording all of this, and the video. This is going to be posted online. So it looks like I'm going to be going a little bit. Well, I don't know, hopefully not more than too much over time. Looking at probably 10 or 15 minutes. So all of it's going to be recorded and available to you. So you're going to insert those information. You may need to find those. You may want to work. So I mentioned referring back to your grant work plans to get some of this information, the program areas, description, and long-term goals. It may help to define your description and long-term goals after inserting the objectives. I find that you have objectives, things you're working on right now. Once you clarify and organize those, I think it'll actually make your long-term goals more, easier to develop. I personally find it pretty easy to establish those, but it just really each circumstance is different. Then from there, inserting, or you may choose to do the second. You may first start inserting and organizing your objectives and milestones by year. So doing this for up to 5 years, I've been recommended 4 years, including the capacity indicators for the objectives that you want to pursue that but don't currently fit within the ETEP's time frame, inserting those at the bottom with possible instead of a specific year. So you at least keep those on your radar. And then including resource needs as specific objectives and milestones or under the possible funding sources I mentioned. And then when the EPA does tell you and agree upon to specific objectives and milestones that they're going to do, then incorporating those into the work plan. You want to insert any plans you have to manage the statutory environmental regulatory program, so breaking that out in particular objectives, but making sure you discuss and determine that with not only tribal leadership and staff, but also the EPA and other stakeholders. So you don't want to be committing to pursuing TAS or to be assuming a delegated regulatory authority before your tribe actually agrees to do so. Inserting additional required information. And the last point too, your tribe probably for most of those will need to actually have some type of formal agreement with the EPA to assume responsibilities, but in some instances that may not be required, but just you want to make sure everybody's on the same page. You require additional information, insert the required additional information. So there's performance indicators, which can be limited to those outputs and deliverables, the role, responsibilities, due date, work years, estimated cost. As I mentioned, the EPA roles for particular objectives must be agreed to by the EPA. And then you can insert optional information. So any additional performance indicators or goals, the area, category, urgency, status, notes, links, references, possible funding sources, amount of funding secured funding sources, and or anything else you may want to track, anything you think that's going to be useful for you. But you want to make this thing workable for you. So, what's going to be realistic? What are you going to be able to track? And you can change it over time. You can be over ambitious in the beginning, and then you find that you only end up tracking kind of the bare minimum. I think just keeping track of the objectives and the required information will be incredibly powerful and enough. If you have the ability to easily manage the other information and integrate it and find ways to make it useful where you're not duplicating effort, then that's, you integrate those. But you try it out. If it doesn't work, then you don't have to continue doing it. After you develop the spreadsheet, then you can prepare that inventory of regulated entities, and that will be developed with probably your GAP project officer or other EPA representative. And then preparing the status of the environmental. So this is an optional thing, or it's not optional in terms of meeting this requirement, but in terms of a checklist, there may be an what you may work on a checklist with the EPA for the status of the federal environmental regulatory programs, at least the tribe's ability, willingness, or intention in terms of assuming those responsibilities. But that does need to be discussed with the tribal leaders and EPA and others. But that is optional, or you may just choose to address that within the strategic work plan itself. So I do think that this is covered to the minimum requirement within the spreadsheet, and you do not necessarily need to do a separate checklist. Implementing and updating ETEP. So to me, an ETEP is a centralized blueprint and performance monitoring system for your entire tribal environmental department. So sorry to do a little wordsmithing as I'm doing this. Oops, well, that didn't work out so well. So your ETEP can be utilized to develop grant and program work plans, especially for your GAP and PPG work plan, but really doesn't have to be an EPA one, doesn't even have to be an environmental one. I think it's important to regularly review it and implement it. For program managers, specialists, technicians, and people working on the ground and stuff, I think reviewing it and working off of it at least monthly, if not using it as just your main work plan, it helps keep track of what needs to be done and ensures continuous. Okay, so yeah, so for these staff, I think working on it monthly, it'll help those staff members keep track of what needs to be done and ensure continuous progress. At the director or manager or EPA level, or just overall program or departmental management, this allows progress, challenges, and opportunities to be. I'm sorry, I think these were sub-bullets of this. So for program managers, this allows to keep track of what can be done. It allows the program managers to keep track of progress, challenges, opportunities, and concerns, and communicate those to managers and the EPA as they arise. The program managers can also utilize them for progress reporting, especially if those performance indicators are updated regularly. This means that progress reporting can actually be done more quickly and efficiently. I think that for environmental, I think they should also be reviewed and updated annually. So I think that doing this should be the main function of the environmental program director, manager, or whoever oversees the department. I think it's an extremely powerful tool to perform essential oversight responsibilities. So this is helping the director do what the director does, or the manager or the supervisor or whoever has that overarching responsibility. It keeps all those goals, objectives, and programs in alignment and moving forward. So I recommend updating one program area at a time and rotating throughout the year. So this is an ongoing process which will help you keep on track with everything. For example, if you have 6 total program areas, I would recommend reviewing and updating one program area every 2 months. If you have 12, then you do one a month and you just keep rotating. Climate change would be one of them. The general administrative would be another. You may find that you're updating other ones as you're doing it as needed, but you have one major focus area. So you're focusing on water in January, you're focusing on air in February, you're focusing on waste in March. And then you rotate like that throughout the year, and you're updating each one. So you're going to during each year, you're going to add a year on the back end of it. So for a 4-year plan, let's say you have a 4-year plan for this year right now, and this is 2016 or 2016 is about to start, you archive 2015 and then you add 2019 on the back end. So it does become a living perpetual plan. Oops, sorry. Your ETEP, I think, can be used very well as a communication tool. So you can communicate what your department's doing, where you're going, what resources you need between staff, other departments, agencies, partners, and other stakeholders. It helps you share a clear and organized yet adaptable strategy that can gain the support that you need. So communicating this to partners lets them know what you need very clearly, and they can help you achieve those goals. I think internally it helps. If you go to other departments where there's overlap and you share this plan with them, most of the departments you talk to are not going to have a strategic plan. And if you offer to allow them to have input into your plan during the development and while you're updating it, you're going to empower them as well. They're going to be invested in your plan, in your activities. They're going to want to see the success for it. They're going to see it as a tool to achieve their goals. So I think when you do that, when you present it to other departments, stakeholders, especially internally, present the plan as a draft because that can be changed. It really is always supposed to be a draft. It's a living plan. And I think that if it's presented in that manner, it can generate greater stakeholder investment and support. If it's seen as a fixed thing, as it's seen as just your goals, then you may get more resistance to it. So just some general ETEP advice. I provided some of this, include all programs and activities that are the responsibility or within the scope of your department. Don't just include what can be funded or regulated by or under the EPA. The templates can and should be customized to meet your needs. Their recommendations, all of this, a lot of it's recommendations, at least, my templates are recommendations. The templates and recommendations shared during the presentation, I should stick to the script sometimes, are not the only way to develop an ETEP. So there's other ways to do it, and they should be customized if you do choose to. So this is just a little quote from the EPA. Specific format and approach to developing ETEPs may vary from tribe to tribe and region to region. Maximum flexibility is provided as to how ETEPs are developed. Strategic planning and ETEPs. So I want to share how these things can be linked and how you can make your ETEP perhaps even more powerful. So I think if you combine them, they can be, if well done, they can be incredibly powerful. I've seen and heard of lots of strategic planning efforts out there that are a waste of time. They end up spinning their wheels, they end up sitting on a shelf, and they're just not done. They're not done thoroughly, they're not done well. My approach isn't the only way to do it well, but if you do take the time to come up with an effective approach and you stick to it, I think you're going to find that you have done, it's going to be the most powerful tool and approach you develop for your office. It's going to help you do things more efficiently, effectively. So ETEPs can be most effective when done as part of an overarching strategic plan or strategic planning process. The basic components of a strategic plan are your establishing and defining and clarifying your mission, vision, and values. Usually involve conducting both an internal and an external SWOT analysis, so looking at your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Looking at your overall departmental goals. So in the ETEP, you are more looking at your program area goals. This is establishing those overarching goals. And then there's really refining those priority program areas and goals, which are part of that strategic work plan. And the objectives and critical performance indicators are also part of that strategic work plan. So in doing a normal strategic planning process for an organization, for a tribe, if I didn't have a TEP or an ETEP as a particular objective, I would actually include an ETEP process into it. It's these two components right here. So for me, an ETEP is a strategic work plan. It's the nitty-gritty of how you accomplish your highest goals. Oops. Let's see. So strategic planning benefits Strategic plans allow you, and that process allows you to discern your department's highest goals and values. And it's important to look back at these on a periodic basis. You're welcome, Linda. Understand the department's, you want to just understand your department's why, what, and how. It provides overall guidance and alignment for your office, for your programs, your staff, your activities, really anything that you do. It also provides that overall guidance and alignment for developing and implementing your ETEP. It helps you identify and improve your departmental culture, which I think is, not tribal culture, but your departmental culture. So what are your common practices? What is your culture? What are your highest values as the individual staff members working in the department? What inspires you to do the work that you do, and how can you integrate that into your work more? It can uncover and break through departmental challenges. The scope of it can go beyond 5 years. An ETEP is rightfully limited to 4 or 5 year time frame. If you start getting beyond a 4 to 5 year time frame at the level of detail that you have with an ETEP, then it just starts to be more abstract. It really is not, it's not really helping you. But your strategic plan can and should, well, your strategic plan can and should go beyond 5 years. So it can be looking 10 years out, it can be looking at 15 years out. It can, the scope of that is not as limited. It doesn't need to be, it takes less effort to develop than an ETEP, at least the ETEP portion of it. As I mentioned, there's, part of developing a strategic plan involves an ETEP, but if you separated the non-strategic work plan elements, the doing mission, vision, values, SWOT analysis, your overarching goals, is not nearly as much time as developing the ETEP. You're welcome, man. And then it really helps you, and then you have to review and revise it less frequently. So it's something that you should look at least once a year. But I think that, you don't really need to overhaul it or go in depth or do like a full analysis maybe every 3 to 5 years. So you can kind of tweak it, but it's really going to not take a whole lot of time. And it really effectively communicates your department's why, what, and how to others and to yourselves. I mean, internally. You want your staff to understand it and to be involved in reshaping it as it needs to be reshaped. Both of these are meant to be reshaped as conditions changed. So how can I help beyond what I've already done? And I want to put this out here. I want everybody to be able to do a better job. I can only help so many people. I'm one person. I do work with others from time to time, but if all the tribes wanted me to help them develop their ETEPs, that would be physically impossible for me to do. But I do have availability and can help. So what are the steps and stages, and what in particular can Prosper do? So researching and drafting, and how can it be broken up depending on the availability, your available resources. Researching and developing that draft list of objectives and milestones is something that Prosper can do. So I can organize and by recommended program priorities. So doing all that research and organizing that information and distilling it also can include developing draft performance indicators, program goals, and etc. If you don't want that level of assistance, if you wouldn't want me drafting it, then I could review what you did, provided ideas and feedback. I mean, funding may be a limitation as well. Preparing the draft ETEP strategy work plan, that would include what's, that initial drafting of those objectives and milestones, and then inserting those into the ETEP. An alternative to that would be to review your ETEP and provide you ideas and feedback, and which would not necessarily mean that I would have to review your objectives and milestones. You may not even choose to do that as a precursor step. I just want to make a note too that on-site work may not be necessary, reducing costs. I mean, most of this stuff I've been able to do remotely. Sometimes can be helpful to do a site visit, but frankly, with all the documents, information I review, I have a very, very good understanding. I'm looking at documents, information, and sifting through it and processing it, organizing it very quickly, and it's probably things that many people in the office either have never seen or might have forgotten about. Conducting a strategic planning process is another way Prosper could help. So could include an on-site strategic planning retreat, which I think is valuable to do, and I'm doing with 2 tribes, or going to be doing with 2 tribes. This can include the option number 1 and 2, so doing the ETEP portion of it. It doesn't necessarily have to. And also just assisting with the ETEP review and revision process. So if you have an ETEP in place, I can help facilitate your review and revision process, and or I could do the research, obtain input, and draft the updates based on your feedback. So all of this is done. I'm basically just doing what you want to do according to meeting your needs. I'm listening to you, and I'm putting what you want down on paper in a system that's workable for you, crafting it, customizing it to meet your needs. So something to consider too is, whether whether you need Prosper's assistance, and whether working with Prosper is a good fit. I have kind of high need, good fit on the left side, and low need, poor fit on the right side. If you have limited staff time, I think there's a higher need and a better fit versus an abundance of staff time. If you have a lot of available staff time, raise your hands. So these are factors too. So this isn't like saying that, if you're in one section or the other, you need assistance or not. Important factors: available funding. So you would need to have obviously some available funding to pursue this. If you don't have available funding, you can't find any way to obtain available funding for any outside assistance, or your funding needs to go to staff time. If you don't fund your staff, you have to let go of your staff. I don't want you to let go of staff to hire me. So if you are stretched that thin, use your staff to do this. That'll mean you have more, you definitely will have a lot of ownership over this. If you see the ETEP as an opportunity to be more effective, I want to work with you. If you only want to check and eat your ETEP off your list of things to do, then I may not be as good of a fit. I'm passionate about this. I see it having tremendous power and effectiveness. Doesn't mean that I would approach it any differently, any less efficiently, but I want to work with people who understand and see the value in what I'm doing. It'll mean that you value what I'm doing for you more than you would otherwise. If you desire an outside perspective, then I certainly can provide that. If you're wary of an outside perspective, and there's a variety of reasons for this, good, bad, or indifferent, then that's a factor to consider. If you welcome assistance in completing the ETEP and/or strategic plan, then we could be a good situation. If you have a strong desire to complete the ETEP and/or strategic plan without assistance, then that would not be a good fit. So for me, it's not, it's more for you to evaluate, and whether it's a good fit for you, and just being honest with yourself. For me, it's if you have gotten the information you feel like you need from this presentation, and you think you can knock it out of the park, then you should. I think that, and you have the time and the ability to do so. In some instances, it really comes down to time. I've working with environmental programs that are highly capable and could do a lot of this on their own, do a very good job, but with everything else going on, it helps them to have somebody else taking upon this, so it's not taking away time and to help develop that system in a manner that hopefully will ultimately save them time in the long run. So if your department lacks applicable internal skills and experience, then that's where there might be a need and a good fit. If you possess the applicable internal skills and experience, it's something where there may be less need. If you see value in investing in strategy, that would be a better need and fit. If you prefer working project to project versus working on strategy, that would be less of a need and fit. And lastly, if you are willing to invest the time and effort in this process, that's a good fit, although I guess that's not really applicable. I mean, you may find that you're actually spending more time on this if you're, and it's more of spending the time and effort in strategic planning as an ongoing thing. If you're willing to invest it on an ongoing basis, it's a good fit. If you want to spend a minimal time and effort on this, not only in developing this, but in the long run, then the downside of that is you may not reap all the rewards, and you may not save the amount of time down the road that you could save. But I just wanted to share that. Benefits of Prosper's assistance, and there's only 2 more slides. One of them is just more of a concluding statement. Help you maximize the value of your ETEP and strategic plan. I will, definitely ensure all the ETEP requirements are you meet all the ETEP requirements but in the most useful manner possible to your department. I'm very systematic, efficient, and effective, and I hope I've demonstrated that into my approach of both ETEPs and strategic plans. I mean, I a lot of experience, a lot of training. I'm an attorney as well. I'm very detail oriented. I can process, so I have the ability to process, review, and organize an extensive amount of information quickly. I'm experienced. I provide a fresh perspective. Can provide an experienced, fresh, and insightful perspective. Offer creativity, idea generation, and innovative solutions. I do have knowledge of available resources, whether that's funding, training, partnerships. I'm also good at identifying opportunities that others may not see. I work quickly and efficiently, so I definitely keep it on project, on task, and moving forward. I always customize the approach to meet clients' goals and needs, so I would definitely make sure that I'm listening to and meeting your needs. I'm passionate, energetic, and at least I've been told enjoyable to work with. And I think very important, at least distinguishing myself from other consultants, and just, I never really met anybody else who has the experience that I have. And I understand how to work with and for tribes. I have 7 years of experience with the Chumash. Been working with as a consultant for the last year on various services for tribes. So I think that's kind of a critical thing. I understand what those things that people who have not worked with tribes just don't understand. And I don't have to explain any further because you all do understand what that means. Other services, if you need any other assistance, drafting in tribal environmental laws, grant writing, project management, resource management plans, program and project planning, feasibility studies, business planning, market analysis. And something that I'm starting to roll out too is collaborative personal strategy, which is, I don't like the word coaching. I really do think that it should be a collaborative process. I would say that what I've gone through today is actually collaborative organizational strategy. So my final note and message is that an effective and consistent investment of time and effort into developing and implementing a strategic plan and an ETEP will save you time and save your department time in the long run while providing the straightest, quickest path to achieving your department's highest goals in a lasting manner. I would like to add that, in a lasting manner, regardless of whether you work with Prosper on this. And these are highly important yet low urgency activities, developing an ETEP and doing strategic planning, that I hope you won't neglect. In my opinion, they are the most effective investment of time and effort you can make in your department and in your program. So thank you very much. I have not seen any questions, but if you have any, please enter them right now. If I don't see any in a moment, I'll end the presentation. I appreciate all of your time. I hope this has been helpful. I hope that I get to work with some of you. Feel free to send me an email or give me a call. And keep doing the great work that all of you are doing. And I do want to remind people that there is, I think when you exit or when I stop the presentation, there will be a survey at the end. So please especially like the feedback on what went well and where I can improve. So, and thank you very much for all, all the feedback I'm getting right now.
The online meeting is ended, and you'll now be disconnected from the call. Goodbye.